Hey everyone, in today's video we are going to see how do you block a call on the call manager based on the calling party number. In our last video we went through how do you block this call on the gateway level if you are using H323 or SIP gateway. Basically just to revise, we created some translation profile and created some translation rule and applied the translation rule on the dial pair and blocked the call. If you would like to have a revisit of the video, I'll put the link in the description so that you can have a look again how to block the call on the gateway. Now, but this way you cannot block a MGCP gateway. So which means if you are using a MGCP gateway, you cannot block the calls on your gateway, but you have to block the call on your call manager. But if you're using H323 or SIP, you can block the calls on the gateway. But in today's video, we are going to use we are going to block the calls on the call manager, irrespective of what protocol you're using, whether it is a H323, MGCP or SIP. Right? You can just play around with some configuration and block the call. So let's revisit the scenario what we have used the last time. So it's going to be remain same. So there's a person who is having a number 91801060,001 is trying to call 10,002. So the call comes from the PSTN or SIP gateway, hits the gateway and then hits the call manager, and the call is routed to 10,002. Now we are using, let's say, MGCP gateway. Now as you know, right, with MGCP gateway you cannot block the call on the gateway because that's a master and slave protocol, and because of which it does not have, the gateway does not have any control on by its own where it can block the call. So in that case you have to block the call on the call manager itself. Now as I said, irrespective of what protocol you are using, we can block the calls on the call manager itself. Right now in our case we want the call to be blocked on the call manager. So you have to play around with some configuration, and those configuration are like CSS and partition, and of course you have to play around with translation pattern as well in order to block the call. The initial setup might be little confusing, but once you are done with the setup, so it is a straightforward configuration that you have to apply on all the gateways or on all the gateways trunk, I would say. Right? So let's take a scenario here. So the configuration here is, so you have to create couple of CSS and partition. So this CSS and partition is for example, first and the foremost, you are going to create a gateway underscore CSS, and this gateway underscore CSS will have access to only gateway underscore partition. So you will have no other partition inside gateway underscore CSS, and this gateway underscore CSS will be applied on the inbound CSS of the trunk or the gateway. Right? Whether you're using MGCP gateway or SIP trunk, you have to apply this CSS on the inbound CSS, and when the call comes in to this trunk or the gateway, it checks for this gateway underscore CSS and see what partition it has access to. Right? So the next thing what you're going to do is you are going to create a CSS called filter underscore CSS and filter underscore partition. So which means filter underscore CSS will have access to only filter underscore partition. Right? So I'll tell you the reference, right, where exactly it is referenced, so that it will give you clear idea, right, what you're doing. And there are a few set of other commands. What you have to do is you have to create let's talk about this. You have to create a translation pattern called gateway called bang, and this bang will have access will be in gateway underscore partition. So which means when the call comes hit the call manager, it checks, okay, my inbound CSS is gateway underscore CSS, and this gateway underscore CSS has access to gateway underscore partition. Now this gateway underscore CSS partition will have access to this translation pattern called bang and gateway underscore partition and filter underscore CSS. So this filter underscore CSS will be applied in the gateway underscore in this particular translation pattern. So which means when the call comes in, it hits this gateway underscore partition, and this gateway underscore partition will have access to filter underscore CSS. So it will look for all the partition that will be inside filter underscore CSS. And it is also you're enabling one feature called route next hop by calling party number. That's the feature which we are going to use in order to block the call based on the calling party number, right? And once you're done with this configuration, right, so the next configuration you have to do is you have to create another translation pattern that will be a allowed pattern. So the previous pattern what you created is basically a filter pattern. Now this will be a allowed pattern, translation pattern. All right, in this translation pattern what you're going to do is you're going to create a bang, and this bang will be in filtered underscore partition. And this filter underscore partition will have access to internal CSS, which means all the phones. So which means when you're making a call, the call hits the inbound trunk CSS, and this inbound trunk CSS will come and hit this translation pattern. And this translation pattern basically has access to filter underscore CSS, and this filter underscore CSS will have access to filter underscore partition, and this filter underscore partition will have access to internal device phones. So when the call comes in, it hits directly, it routes the call to the phones. Now you must be thinking, where are you blocking the call? So basically we are blocking the call on another level of translation pattern where we are blocking that call. So which means once you create this translation pattern, right, you have to create another translation pattern as 91801060,001. This is going to be our blocking number. So this is the number which we want to block from being received as an inbound call. Now this partition will be same like your allowed pattern, filtered underscore PRT. Okay. Now in case of CSS, you're going to assign this to none CSS. And there's an option called in the translation pattern where you either route the pattern or block the call, right? So we are going to use block the call. So the call, basically the call, when the call hits this translation pattern, it blocks the call. So again, the call flow would be, if let's say this guy is calling 10,002, the call will come to this gateway, and from this gateway to the call manager and checks the inbound CSS. Basically the inbound CSS, which is gateway CSS, and gateway CSS will have partition access to gateway underscore partition, and this gateway underscore partition basically will hit a translation pattern which will have access to the bang, which will be bang, and this bang and gateway partition will have access to filtered partition. Filter CSS, now what it does is it routes the call based on the next hop by calling party number. Now this particular filter CSS will have access to two translation pattern at this moment. One is this pattern and one is this pattern. So if it checks the call is if the calling number is matched, then it is going to hit the specific match. So which means we are blocking this call. So this is very closest match, or I would say very exact match. So it is going to hit this translation pattern when the call comes from 60,001, hits straight filtered partition and blocks the call. If the match is not found, 60,001 is not found on the calling party number, it is going to hit this translation pattern and this partition and route the call to the internal phones, right? So this is the call flow I have designed. So the call comes from 60,001 to 10,002, comes to the PS-Train gateway, so from the PS-Train cloud to the voice gateway, and from the voice gateway, no matter what protocol you are using, whether MGCP, H323 or SIP, you are sending the call to call manager, and in this call manager inbound trunk you are using gateway underscore CSS as an inbound trunk, and this gateway underscore CSS has access to gateway underscore partition. Now what it does is it matches a bang with a translation pattern with a gateway underscore PRT. Now this gateway underscore PRT will have access to filter underscore CSS, will be assigned with a filter underscore CSS, and this option will be checked route next hop by, sorry, this it's a spelling mistake, hop by calling party number. And now when it hits this when it checks for the filter underscore CSS, it says okay, I have access to filter underscore partition in filter underscore CSS. Now it goes and check what all things are there as part of the filtered partition. Now if the calling number is match is found, as if the calling number is let's say 91801060,001, and if the match is found, it is saying okay, the match is found, block the call. If let's say if someone is calling from 91801060002, it'll check okay, this is not matching my number, this is not my number where I'm calling from, so I need to match this based on the caller ID, and the caller ID is 60002, not 60001. It is going to say if the number is not 60001, route the call by matching the following pattern: any number, filtered partition, internal CSS, route the call to 10002, right? So this is how exactly the call flow looks like. So now let's do some of the configuration so that we can make the call routing. Before that, I wanted to show you at this moment how exactly the setup is going to look like. On the right hand side on the CIPC, you see this is a nuisance caller. So this is the person whom we want to block from calling 10002. Now let's see by dialing 10002 and see if the call is ringing on 10002 or not. Let's test this setup first. So at this moment it is not routing the call. Let me check the gateway or the trunk if the CSS is correctly assigned or not. Give me a moment. Okay, I just resetted my trunk because the trunk was not up. So now the trunk is up. So I'll make a call again. So see, the call is coming to 10002. I hanged up the call. So now what we want to do is we want to apply some of the configuration and see how does it look like. Now if I have to show you, right, my inbound on the trunk level, if I go to the trunk, this is the trunk I'm going to use. And if you look at this trunk, right, the inbound calls, for the inbound calls, the CSS I'm using at this moment is internal CSS. So which means I have access to all the internal foods, right? So instead of that, I'm going to apply some other configuration so that I can block the call on the call manager. So I'll come here in the call routing, class of control, and create some partition. So I'll add the partition as gateway underscore PRT. Next partition I'll going to add filter underscore PRT. So we are going to add this two partition as per the scenario we have designed. So gateway underscore PRT and filter underscore PRT. Okay, let's save this. Now if you look, this partition gateway filter underscore PRT and gateway underscore PRT is configured. Now let's create the CSS. So we'll come here in the CSS. Now click on add new. Now we'll add the CSS as gateway underscore CSS and add gateway underscore partition in this CSS. Okay, so we have added this particular pattern here. So gateway CSS has access to gateway underscore partition. So let's do the same for filtered partition as well. Let's apply filter underscore CSS, and this filter underscore CSS should have access to filter underscore partition. Now this filter underscore CSS has access to filter underscore partition. So this configuration is created. Now let's apply gateway underscore CSS on the trunk level. I'll go to the trunk, QIVR, come here. Now instead of internal CSS, I'm going to apply gateway underscore CSS to the inbound call. I'll reset the trunk. Okay, so we are done with this part. Now let's quickly create a couple of translation pattern and see. The first translation pattern we are going to use as bang, which is going to be gateway underscore partition and filter underscore CSS. Call routing, translation pattern, add new. So I'm going to create a bang, and in partition I'm going to use as gateway underscore partition, and here I'm going to apply the CSS filter underscore partition and check this box, provide outside dial tone, and I'm going to route the call based on the calling party number. So in the next hop, whenever it routes a call, right, it is going to route based on the calling party number so that it can check whether to block the call or to allow the call, right? You can give a description if you want. I'll quickly save. So now this particular configuration is created. Now we have to either allow or block the call. So we have to create two more translation pattern. I'll go click on add new, create another translation pattern as bang, and in this translation pattern I'm going to use filter underscore partition, right? So this is the partition we are going to use here, and then this filter underscore partition should have access to gateway underscore internal underscore CSS, so which means any call coming and hitting this translation pattern should have access to all the internal phones. I'll quickly save this. Okay, note I have unchecked this box. This box is not checked in case of filter underscore partition, right? So this part is done, this part and this part is done, and this part is done. So now if I try to make a call from 60001, the call should be ideally be allowed. Let's test it out quickly. I was able to answer the call. Now I want to block this call, the call coming from 60001. I want to get this call blocked on the call manager. Now let's create another translation pattern. 91. I'll add this translation pattern as 918010 Now this has to be in filter partition, and you don't have to assign any specific CSS. Let it be none, and here you have to block this pattern. Either you can choose no error, unallocated number, call rejected, doesn't matter, it will block the call. Let's see unallocated number, and then click on save. Now if I try to make a call, right, what it is going to do is it is going to check, it is first going to hit this translation pattern, and after it hits this translation pattern, it is going to route the call by the calling party number. So when the calling party number, it routes the call based on the calling party number. It is going to check whether the calling party's number is matching this translation pattern or not. If it is not matching the blocking pattern, it is going to route the call with the allowed pattern, right? So let's make a call now and see if the call comes in. You see, I'm getting a call as unknown number, so which means the call is blocked, right? So this clearly says, right, the call can be blocked based on the calling party number on the call manager. Now if let's say there is another user with 60002, if 60002 dials this 10002, right, will the call be blocked? No, it will not be blocked, because you have created a very specific match, 60001. Now if I have to block 60002 also, right, I may have to create one more pattern with 60002, or maybe I can create something like this. So it will block 60001 and 60002, right? So let's say in future, if you get any such request, right, to block another call with a different number, come here, copy this existing block pattern, and then add number. Let's say you want to block the call as 60080. That should be another blocking pattern that you need to add. Click on save. Now if you look, you'll have two patterns. So this is going to be a blocking pattern, this is going to be another blocking pattern. So make sure you put the right description so that it will be easy for you to know, right, what are the block numbers that you have to know, right? So these two numbers will be blocked. Now I quickly wanted to show you using the DNA, right, and show you how does the blocking looks like when you are using a DNA. I'll duplicate this window, go to the DNA, and then analysis, go to the trunk and select the trunk from where you're getting an inbound call. Now in this trunk, I'm going to add the number is 918010 60001, and this guy is going to dial 10002. Let's see if the call says as blocked or not. You see, the calling party number is 60001. It is going to use the inbound trunk as gateway underscore CSS, and this gateway underscore CSS is basically, it is going to eventually block this call, stating that the number is unallocated or unassigned number. And if you see the match pattern, right, it is going to match the pattern as 918010 60001, which is in filter underscore partition. So basically this is the partition it is talking about. 918010 60001 is being matched, which is in filter partition, and we are blocking this call here. Note, if you allow this pattern, the call may route. Of course you have to play around with the CSS, right? CSS has to be assigned, but you should not route this pattern, you should block this pattern, right? So you see overall the call flow, the call is going to hit initially the translation pattern with a bang, and this translation pattern will be in this partition, and this is how the call flow looks like, right? Eventually the calls gets blocked. Now if I change this number to, let's say, 60,005 for example, and do a DNA, let's see what happens. You see, it says route the call, and how it routes the call, basically it first comes and hits a bang on with the gateway partition, and then after that it is going to hit another bang partition with where it will be allowed to route all the calls, and after that it is going to hit 10,002 as a number, right? So if you remember, like, we created one more blocking pattern. If I do a DNA with the another blocking pattern, it will block the call. Let's quickly test this. 60,080 is what our another blocking number was. So this is block the call. So we'll do a DNA. You see, it says block the call. So I hope you are clear with the configuration and the call flow. So in order to route the calls based on the block the calls based on the calling party number, so either we can apply the configuration on the gateway if you are using H323 or SIP gateway, but if you are using MGCP gateway, or let's say if you are using any of these three protocols, MGCP, H323 or SIP, right? So you can block the calls based on the calling party number on the call manager itself, and you have to use the feature called route next hop by calling party number. I hope this video is informative for you. Thank you for watching.